session of what we call introduction or warm up to the real content of learning theories. So before we start our learning theories, which is the core focus of this course, we need to understand something about what is needed, what is required, or what is the prerequisite to learn. So for example, we have a prerequisite to this course. So why do we have a prerequisite to a certain course or including this course? Why do we have to have a prerequisite?
So that we learn the basic thing first.
Mm-hmm. So it's just like this. So it is required that you take another course where you will be taught the basics, and then you can come into this class so that you do not struggle with what could be taught in this class. So the focus of this class is learning theories, and you have studied quite a lot of them in 120, right? So you must have seen an overview of all the learning theories, but here we are going to see how we could apply it in classroom. This is a 300 level course. It's an application oriented. It's not 120, which is knowledge oriented, right? So that's the difference between the prerequisite, where you learn information about a certain topic, and 300 level course, and above 200, 300, 400. That is, for example, 400 is mostly internship, which is practically using whatever knowledge and skills you have learned over a number of years through different courses. While so 100 level is a prerequisite. It means you should have learned, studied some content. Well, studied, I'm not sure whether learning will come to that, how we learn and how we make that content part of our long-term memory. So earlier we looked at Piaget's learning theory. We looked at zonal proximal development the other day. So today we are going to look at language development. So this is also, now language development doesn't mean our ability to speak and communicate with others. Language development also shows learning capability, how we could learn, right? And how can we learn most, right? For example, if a person, so there is another concept of multiple intelligences. So multiple intelligences, one of the intelligences is the word intelligence. So the word intelligence is where you can play with words. You can write, right? So you can speak well, and you can use lots of words in your, for example, all the writers who have written, whether it is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter book series, or whether it is Charles Dickens, whether it is, what is that, the American writers who has written a lot of books around children. I'm forgetting his name. Okay, or maybe Tolstoy, the Russian writer, the writer of War and Peace, right? So those are all intelligent people, right? We could call them philosophers, but because if you read, I'm not saying if you watch, but if you read the books of Harry Potter, you will see lots of references to philosophy, religion. So you will see all that, right? So if you look at the story, the concluding book also, so you see the good winning over the evil, right? So Harry is able to defeat Voldemort. So that is the idea which is found in almost every movie. Good wins at the end, right? So, but the way she has taken that story throughout those 8, 9, 10 books, it shows that sometimes it was the evil that was winning, and sometimes it was the good that was winning. But at the end, it was good that prevailed, or goodness that prevailed. So that is language development. So if you read that book, or maybe what is that? Where we have those, it's a 3 series movie. What is that? It was filmed in New Zealand. They have small dwarfs also in that movie. I'm just forgetting. Just need to recall that name. Okay, so when the name comes, I will let you know. So it's also based on books, right? And then we have very famous Narnia, right? So it's also based on books, Carl Lewis books, and so that is also philosophy, theology, intertwined or entwined with language. So it shows that that we have a capacity to learn language and to develop that. Some of them are capable to take it to a level where many of us can't take it, right? So that's why they are able to write books. They are able to weave those words together to create an image or a picture, right? If you read those books, you will see the writer has created that image in front of you. Film में हम देखते हैं कि वो सारा scene लगा होता है, but books में you have to read and imagine that this is happening, this thing is moving, that sound is created or made, right? But in books, you have to imagine something is happening, and you have to imagine this is the noise, this is a movement, that is how the door is opening. And so that is how the language is developed. So it's important that language development is an essential part of our cognitive system, our cognition. And how, so language, for example, these days, language is not only written and spoken language, language is also what we call sign language. We use our hands, right? We make different, use our hands and fingers and different gestures, different signs to communicate a certain message that we call sign language. Right, so that is also language, and people who invented or created that language, that was there to, as you can see, it was there to help those who might be struggling with hearing. So they can't hear, but since they can see, so they can make those words with using hands. Right now, each language has its own set of signs. Urdu has its own, English has its own, Spanish, German, French, Dutch, Russian, all have its own, because each language has its own certain sound patterns, right? Phrase. Yeah, so all this. That's why we do not have a universal sign language. It varies from language to language. And there is a nice advertisement on it also, where they have shown a student in the class, and I think he can't speak. So students are making fun of that student. Another student who knows this language, he comes and helps him or her, him actually, and then that's how the student is made part of that classroom, because that student becomes his friend, spokesperson. So he's able to communicate him what others are saying, because others can't use the sign language, right? So the student who is deaf, who can't speak, can use the sign language, and another student who can speak, can use the sign language. So that is how they're trying to. And these days there is another ad coming on. It's also, I think, a tea company, where they have shown a boy who stutters, and he's interviewed by someone, and he said that I would speak. Right? So which is something they are trying to sensitize our society. It's another thing whether we can be sensitized through this advertisement. That's another story, which we haven't. If that was the case, we would have stopped taking bribes. We would have stopped hoarding things. We would have stopped selling fake goods, under invoicing, over invoicing. We'd have done it long time ago. ठीक है ना, तो नहीं हुआ तो कुछ नहीं हो सकता हमारा. जो मर्जी एडवर्ट्स दे दें, जो मर्जी मौलवी साहब जुमा है आज खुतबा दे दें, हम पे कोई असर नहीं पड़ना, क्योंकि हज के बाद हमने फिर कहना कि ये हज गुनाह माफ हो गए. So we are again a clean slate now. Let's begin again, right? So language is all. So we are not going into great length, because people who research language, they look into, for example, part of my research is looking at how a set of certain messages are communicated to students in English and Urdu languages. So I look at, for example, the sentence is, the mother is working in the kitchen, the father is reading a newspaper, the brother is playing outside, the daughter is helping mother. Now if you look at that whole scene, you see a certain message communicated to students or to the readers or to the learners. ठीक है, मैसेज क्या है, क्या मैसेज है? Right, everyone is doing their work, but the problem is when we say doing their work, I didn't turn on the that's why I think they couldn't see the screen. Okay, so it also means that they are trying to reinforce a certain behavior, right, where kitchen work is part of the female's domain. Father is supposed to sit while women are working, right? And the men are not supposed to be working in the kitchen and helping the women, because that's not their domain. So it's not only that they are creating a scene for us, but they're also, through that, they're also communicating a certain set of ideas. This is how you should be behaving. That is the current pattern, that is the current behavior, and this should be your behavior too. So the boys who are going to read, they're going in primary में 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 numbers से ही पढ़ेंगे, so they will have this what we call embossed. Embossed हो जाता है वो, it goes into and become part of the long term memory के जी men are not supposed to help the women in the household chores. ठीक है, वो women का काम है, आदमियों का काम नहीं है. ठीक है, the women, the girls might think it's my duty to cook and clean and wash. I shouldn't be asking the men to do that. So if I'm going to marry, so I'm not going to ask my husband and my sons to help me. I can only ask my daughters and I have to do that. Right? So those are the ideas. So language is used not only to say hello, hi, but it is more than that, right? So we communicate our behaviors, ideas, and lots of things, and that's what language looks at also. Right, so so language is beginning with sound, A B C D, ठीक है, उसके बाद we move on to what we call words, is R M, computer, printer, bottle, this, and then we goes into phrases. Clear crystal, water, right? It's rectangular table or rectangular. I'm sure this is rectangle. Computer, right? Do we have any spare here? We can't see, but that is also rectangular shape, right? So those are then we move on to phrases. So when children are learning language, they begin with sounds, single sounds, A, B, C, D, then they go on to learning words, right? Water, spoon, fork, and then they go on to learning phrases. ठंडा पानी, गरम पानी, ठीक है, so something, I'm hungry. So they learn those, and from there, so they are using what they can, they are learning what they can use in their everyday life, right? So they're not learning what you might find in Harry Potter series books, or maybe hobbits. So that the film was, it was about hobbits. So they're not learning that kind of language, right? But as they go on to maybe becoming 2 years old or 3 years old, then they can say a lot of things. They will understand. For example, I have a nephew, he's, I think, going to be 3 soon. So when he's annoyed by those children, so he would say, tang. कि ये मुझे तंग कर रहे हैं. So he would not say ये मुझे तंग कर रहे, he would say tang. Okay, they are teasing, right? Or they are, so if he's playing and they don't let him play, so they will say tang, कि ये मुझे खेलने नहीं दे रहे. So they are not letting me play, so they are teasing me, right? So he has used one word. Okay, so that is how children learn. So when they are 4 years old, they are able to say sentence, ये मुझे तंग कर रहा है. Okay, so that's our learning, our language development process also. And this also shows the way what we can learn, right? It shows our capacity to learn, also the capacity to process information. So the first stage is we are processing. So the first stage is they are processing information a lot, but since they cannot speak, so they're not uttering that information. They're not telling others, this is what I know, this is what I do not know, but they are storing lots of information. So when the child said tongue, that means he must have heard this word somewhere, and that's why he is using it now, right? He knows when something like this happens, and this is the word that has been used earlier, right? So his observation and listening has helped him to store that experiences and observation, and that's what happens when we learn also. So the first step of learning is observation, listening through senses, right? And storing that information in our brain. So we store that information there. We may not be using it immediately, but the information is stored somewhere. And then the second stage is the second step of it, when you start using that information. And you have lots of information, but you cannot use all of that information. Because, and why can't we use all of that information? Because we need language. To use that information, you need, either you should have mastered your sign language, or you should have mastered this language that we are using it, right? So the child needs to master that language. Since the child is still in the process of learning or assigning different words to different experiences, assigning different words to different objects, right? This is an object, right? So the child has to assign certain ideas to this. 4 legs, rectangle, hard, right? Draws, right? But this is also, but there are many rectangular shapes in the house. Bed is also rectangular. But the child has to differentiate between different rectangular shapes, right? So that is what, so the child is going to associate lots of words with this particular idea or with particular schema. There is another schema of bed, so the child will attach many words to that schema also. And when the child is able to speak and connect lot of words together, that's when the child is going to connect lots of ideas with one word. The child can say, table is rectangular, it has 4 legs, it is hard, it is made of wood. So there is adjective, which is hard. There are nouns, right? Legs, 4, right? So the child is using many, the child is using nouns and adjectives. Now the bed, the child might say it is soft, again adjective, right? Rectangular, legs. So that is again child is using, but as the child grows older, child is able to add more words, such as adverbs. Adverb is with the action, your verb, and that is when, so they can understand. He is, for example, can you think of an adverb? He runs fast. He runs slow. So it is a certain idea, fast, slow. Now, for someone who runs at 100 meter per second, for that person, someone running at 10 meter per second is very slow. But someone who runs at 10 meter, for that person, someone who is running at 9, that is okay, right? But someone who is running at 100 meter per second, that is very fast, right? So it depends. So they start using adverbs as well, right? So nouns, adjectives, and adverbs, and then they put together to make phrases, right? Runs fast, runs slow, delicious food, tasty food, juicy apple, sweet apple, round, juicy, red apple, right? So many ideas are put together to talk about an apple. Right? So that is how we learn. So when we are growing older, we are able to put together lots of ideas around one thing when connected. Now, round is about shape, right? Juicy is about taste, right? Red is about color, right? So apple is a noun. So the child has put lots of ideas taking from different things, shapes, color, taste, and then put it together to talk about apple. So that is what happens when we learn. So if you're learning about photosynthesis, so you should have learned lots of things about plants before that. You should have learned something about it. They have roots, they have leaves, the leaves are green, they have branches, right? The leaves fall in autumn, what is happening these days, or they turn to some other color. They come back in spring, flowers, right? Plants take food through the roots, right? And then you come on to the photosynthesis thing. And that is how the textbooks are written. So they begin with simple. If you look at the science textbook of class 1, or class 1 doesn't have. Class 3 has science textbook, because class 1, I think, is general knowledge or something. So if you look at class 3 science book and class 5 science book, so you will see a lot of differences there. So class 3 science book will have lots of pictures about labeling, telling students about parts of plants. So they're not going to tell them what a certain part does, but they're going to speak about in next year, class 4 or 5. This is the function of roots. This is the function of leaves. But when they come to class 6 and 7, this is where they will be talking about photosynthesis, which is an abstract idea. You cannot see a leaf making food for itself using minerals from absorbed through the roots and taking in sunlight, and something is there is fire and there is pot and pan and they have put all these things and something is cooked for the plant. Yes, they can't see, but that's an abstract idea of photosynthesis, right? So the child can only understand these abstract ideas once the child has reached to which stage? So there are 4 stages of cognition. Formal operational. Formal operational is where you can understand abstract concepts, right? So that is formal operational. So the ideas like photosynthesis and other that you see in class 6, 7 books, those are all what we call the formal operational stage content. So that is, so language also tells us how we learn and what is it that we can learn and what is it that we can demonstrate or tell others what we have learned. And what, as I said a while ago, you may not be able to show your learning at a certain stage, but it does not mean we have not learned, right? So that's why when we look at the classroom, so that's why they ask, or they tell teachers, do not say this to students you do not know. The student may know, but at this particular time, the student is unable to communicate that information to you, right? The student might have registered the information, but student may not have the language or may not be able to connect that language or those experiences with what you want students to connect, because the teacher is not giving him or her the right clues or the right cues. Teacher has to give correct or right hints so that that information can be activated. Or brain information activate hogi, then the child can produce that information or bring that information forward. Right? So that is important. So it's similar. So when we're looking at language development, we can also look at how we learn. We learn with simple things. One, which is sound, alphabets, which is one word, right? And then we go on to putting many alphabets together, which becomes words. And then we move on to the next stage, which is putting many words together, which could be a phrase. And then we move on to sentences, where we put a lot of words and each sentence is communicating a certain message, right? So the sentence might be simple, right? This is an apple, this is a red apple. So you may write 4 sentences talking about apple. This is an apple, it is red, it is juicing, it is, what was the other one? Sweet, right? Or you can say one sentence having all these ideas: red, juicy, sweet, apple, right? So that is what it tells us how, us about our learning as well. How we could make our learning complex. Now writing 4 sentences is easier, but saying those 4 ideas in short phrase, that is complex stage. And that is only possible if you have mastered a certain language, certain set of words or ideas, right? So that is why I started this with what we call novels. So if you go back to that concept again, then that's what those people were doing. They were putting those, when you read those books actually, then you will see that you are consulting dictionary a lot of time, many times, and you might give up reading those books. The reason is, why are we consulting books? The dictionary, sorry. Because since we do not know the meaning of the particular word, because we didn't hear that word earlier, right? But the writer somehow or the other has heard and found that word. Now remember, writers also use dictionary a lot. ये नहीं होता कि उनके ज़हन में पूरी dictionary भरी है. They keep consulting dictionary. They keep using. They have to tell others that I know more than you. My vocabulary is better than you, right? So they keep using dictionary. So that is important to understand. Okay, when we look at the development stages, we are looking at this aspect also. So systems of language development. So we move on to, and then the last part of the language development is abstraction, what we call generalization. So we have general behaviors or general language attached to general concepts. So that is the last part of our learning, where so we are able to think in terms of abstract ideas, we are able to present abstract ideas, complex ideas, but it's important that we are able to connect those abstract ideas with lots of other ideas. So we're able to connect many things together. We're able to connect science with sociology, psychology, history, geography, environment, right? So all those things. So that is what we are supposed to do at the formal operational stage. So we should be able to make connections between different subjects, between ideas found in different subjects, and use it and create new knowledge for ourselves. So earlier you were not able to connect environment with science. So if you are able to connect environment with science, that means for many that is old knowledge, but for you that is new knowledge, because now you have connected those 2 ideas if you're already there, but earlier they were not connected. So you have constructed something for yourself. So that's what learning is, right? So learning does not mean which didn't exist earlier in the world. No, learning means you have those ideas, you observe, but now you are able to connect it with your surroundings, and you can present, or you can talk about it with others as well. So that's what learning is, right? So that is when they're asking questions in maths or physics or chemistry or biology. So they're not asking you to give definitions. The question should be asked whether you are able to connect that idea with the environment, with the surroundings. Okay? That's why we are unhappy with our examination system, TUME, and we like the what we call O levels and A levels examination system. Simple reason is the types of questions which are asked in ARC examination system, which is the metric and intermediate, and the Cambridge examination system, right? So the question which are asked, the knowledge and skills which are assessed. So that is why we people, they prefer their children, if they can afford to even if they may not be able to afford easily, but they will make sure that if they can afford and save from somewhere and send his or her or their child to a school where he or she will be prepared to take O levels, A levels, etc. Right? So that is, so they are ready to spend because they believe that it's not only a matter of prestige, but it's also a matter of enabling the child to develop that skill. For some, it might be a matter of prestige, but for some, it may not be. Because they do not want the child to just memorize information, memorize, and they're not using that information. So they're not learning anything actually. So right? So learning is actually making connections. So that's what language is all about. So language development is actually tells the story of learning also, how learning happens and how when we learn something and what we can learn as you can see, when the child is earlier stages, the child is observing a lot, right? And that observation is stored somewhere, right? So that this is what happens when we are in an earlier stage, and that is why the younger children, if you observe them, they are eager to touch everything. They want to touch everything. They want to play with everything. They do not know whether it is dangerous or whether it is hot. They want to taste everything because that is what they do not know. So they wanted to know what it is, what it can do. They're not looking at what it cannot do. They wanted to know what it can do, right? How it is going to be helpful to them. Can they play with it? Can they use it? So without telling you, because they can't speak, they haven't developed the ability, the physical ability. So they are doing it. They are exploring the world around them, right? So, but we as the older people think who are in the house, think or believe that they shouldn't be doing it. We have this idea of should or should not, but they don't have, because their idea is we need to explore. So that is why if you look at the houses in our culture, we do have this usko rok lo, isko rok lo, ye na karo, wo na karo. From the very early stages, we start telling. In families where they don't do that, where children are allowed. For example, there was a story of a girl, and she said that, and she shared, and she is a good painter. She paints, and she said, I started painting when I was in school, and I used to paint the wall in my room, and my parents allowed me to do that. Right? So they didn't ask her or tell her, you shouldn't spoil the wall, as mostly we do, right? Don't draw, right? Or maybe don't scribble on the wall, don't scribble on a paper. You're wasting, you're spoiling, right? So that's how she learned. And then she discovered that she has that capacity to make use of colors also. So that is, so encouraging is also important when it comes to learning. Either you can make them learn, or you can hamper their learning, where you can stop or create hurdles in their process of learning. And then you will come on to which we call making sense of the world. Right? This is a good idea for me to use. This is not a good language for me. That these are the decisions which you make when you reach at the formal operational stage, when you have fully developed the idea of good and bad, right? So that is what is there. Now, this is the last part of the session, which is biological and environmental influence of language. As you can see, a brain is divided into two hemispheres, left and right. I'm sure you must have heard these words, right? So our right hemisphere does something, and this is not done by the left hemisphere, and some of the functions are performed better in left hemisphere and right hemisphere doesn't work in those. So different part of our brain is divided into two, and some of the functions are done in the right hemisphere and some of them are done in the left hemisphere. So as you see, they indicate that left hemisphere of the brain play an important role. Left hemisphere plays an important role in a language aspect. When we're learning language, when we're playing with words, our left brain is very active. So when you read, you are activating your left part of the brain, right? So it's important. And well, this is just an idea, but how has it been verified? As I said, there is a branch of psychology called neuropsychology, neurons. So when they connect the cables with the brain, then they must have seen that when someone reads or speaks or use language or learning language, then this part, there is more movement in this part of the brain as compared to this part of the brain. So that's why they might have called it, this is the left hemisphere activity. Okay. So does it mean that the people who may not know lots of words, their left hemisphere is weaker than the right hemisphere? Or let's say science person who's good in maths or other subject, science subject. So could we presume that that person's right hemisphere is strong and left hemisphere is weak?
Both sides of brain are important. They play their own specific functions.
If you look at all the subjects, each subject has its own vocabulary. Right? We are only looking at the novels and the stories, but each subject has its own vocabulary. There are a lot of words which are specific to philosophy. And if someone is going to use the word inductive and deductive and all logic and all that, you may not be able to understand anything what the person is talking. But person who is interested in philosophy will be able to connect to those words. The same is with maths, the sciences, right? So the person is still using the left hemisphere, but this time he may not be or she may not be focusing on talking about the environment, talking about the room, how it is set, behavior of humans, but the person might be talking in terms of languages used in his or her field. So left hemisphere is always active, right? We use it all the time, but we might be using with a certain setup, with a different set of words, not the same as, for example, someone who is doing studying human sciences or social sciences, right? Another quick example is people who in social sciences, critical discourse, when we are talking about these ideas, critical discourse analysis is an important idea, right? Semiotic analysis done, right? So all that is, so you do not understand all what is critical discourse analysis, what is sociological discourse analysis, what is discourse analysis, what is semiotic analysis, right? But if you are into researching words and language and writings, then you would understand all that. But the person who is into researching this may not be able to understand the sciences research terminology, right? So left hemisphere is always active, but it varies from person to person. That person's area of specialization is also important here. So the last point that I'm going to conclude this is environment influence our language development and our learning. As I said earlier, if the parents allow the child to learn, to experiment, to discover and explore one's world, the child is going to be willing to learn more and learn on its own as compared to someone who has been told, okay, you do this, you do that, now it's drawing time, now it is what we call, you can watch this, now you can study this, you can study English, you can study math. If the child is doing as he or she was told, then the child is going to to be dependent upon someone else to be told what to study, what to learn. But if the child is learning from the early stages on its own, then the child can discover and explore what is it that I can do and what is it that I should be doing. With independent learners, autonomous learners, right? So there is a possibility that such children, they, now there could be a debate, right? For example, many people say that Einstein, was it Einstein? The Apple one, the Apple man? Newton, sorry, Newton, not the Einstein, Newton. So if Newton was told from early years that you should study, because in those days education used to be in Latin. So first thing you have to learn to do is learn Latin, to master that Latin language, and then you could go and learn other subjects. And it could be that Latin struggled with language. He couldn't understand, he couldn't learn language and couldn't master that language. So, and because the content was taught in Latin, he couldn't make sense. This content wouldn't make any sense to him. So the teachers might have thought that Newton is a dull student, an unintelligent student. But that was not the case. The case could have been the language, right? So it's also important that when we're talking about one's environment, we must remember that environment influences our learning a lot. It not only influences what we can learn, but also what we are not learning. It's not because we cannot learn, but because the way it is presented to us, the medium, the language, the teaching aids, the type of the information, the vocabulary which is used, it doesn't connect with me. I cannot connect it with it. Right? So that is what they call, we cannot learn it because of this particular reason. So environment plays an important part. If the parents are reading books, the children will be reading books. No, it is not necessary. Right? These days, even the parents are reading, they are reading online, they are reading ebooks. Now the children are going to say, you're also watching screen. Right? So the parents are telling children, do not watch screen. But now parents are also reading online. I have all my books here on my laptop, and my children tells, you're also watching screen. Why can't I watch screen? Right? For them, it's difficult to differentiate between reading something online and playing game on the screen. Right? So that is, but as an adult, I can make sense of it, but they cannot. Right? For them, watching screen is watching screen, whether you play game or you read. Okay? So that is, so environment, in these days, it is difficult, right? Because everything is online. Though I have plenty of books for children, but they're not going to read that, right? For them, the screen is supposed to be either watching YouTube videos or playing a game. Free Fire, yeah, Fire Free जो भी game है. So they, that is what they are doing, and telling the parents also, you also watch screen a lot, right? So let's conclude. Language is actually, if you want to understand how we learn, then the best way to look at it is look at how we have learned a language. How much language we know, right? How much we can use is all about our capacity to learn and process the information around us. And the information we hear, absorb earlier through senses and later through experiences also. Right? So that is, an environment plays an important role in your learning. If parents are using for example, look at Donald Trump. So there is a frequency of words which are very frequently used by Donald Trump, right? Beautiful wall. See, keep using certain adjectives over, and he has overused some of the adjectives, right? But if you look at Obama, his language is very polished, because that is because he went to law college and studied law, he practiced law, so he knew how to, he has read books as well, because to study law and to practice, you have to have books actually, you have to study. हमारे यानी कि आप किसी को पैसे देके एग्जाम दिलवा देंगे, तो he has to study, right? So that was the difference. So the more you study, so the parents influence your education also, your learning as well, right? So we are going to stop here. Do we have any question?